Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring you curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune. Now I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we look at the Eveleth artist who sent his work to Eleanor Roosevelt. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to talk about Joseph Bogdanich, yet another person of interest from the Iron Range, is reporter Teri Cadeau. Teri, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we're no strangers to talking about people and interesting historical happenings / just interesting places, groups up in the Iron Range. For individual people, we've talked about Bobby Arrow, Father Frank Perkovich. Now we're here again with Joseph Bogdanich.
Yeah. So Joseph Bogdanich was an artist who lived between 1890 and 1973. So way before the era of social media and stuff. And yet he was a big promoter of himself. What he did is he took a lot of his works and he sent them to people and organizations. He was just like, oh, you might like this, take this. And he just, I got to go through his letters that he received back from people from a collection that the UMD archives has. And it's kind of amazing to see all the letters back being like, oh, I did not expect to get a painting from you, but thank you so much. We appreciate it. And so he sent it to everywhere. And it's pretty impressive.
Gotcha. And before we get further into his history, how did you come about pursuing this story for this week's Northlandia? I know you generally have your finger on the pulse pretty well when it comes to the Iron Range, but what put you specifically in the direction for this story?
This was literally me. Okay, I'm from Gilbert.
Of course.
And so I go up quite often for the Gilbert 3rd and 4th of July celebrations. Mm-hmm. I went up and did the 3rd of July parade, but my mother has a new puppy, didn't get to see any of the parade, so we went to Eveleth for their parade the next morning. As we were there, we saw there's a little pop-up that the Eveleth Heritage Society had with all kinds of Eveleth history pieces. And one of those was a section on Joseph Bogdanich. And I was like, I have never heard of this man before, but looking over his works and how he kind of was very prolific, he made a lot of different pieces, but wasn't really well known, wasn't really well received by everyone. I was like, that's interesting. I kind of want to dig more into him. And so that's exactly what I did. I have a job that lets me be like, oh, that's interesting. Let me go ahead and dig further into this. And so, yeah.
It is one of the things we appreciate about working for the Duluth News Tribune. We can actually act upon our curiosities.
Yeah, we could be like, oh, that's interesting. Instead of just being like, well, I'll have to Google him someday. I can just be like, no, I'm going to Google him. It's my job.
And investigate old letters and be much further than just a Google.
I mean, especially because when you Google him, there's really not that. I mean, there's some information on the Eveleth Heritage Society website, but other than that, there's not an awful lot out there because, again, died in 1973. Not a huge web presence for some reason.
Until now.
Until now.
New article.
Yes.
Now when they Google it, just like with the Luther and Raspberry, now they're out there into the Google world.
Well, and also he was in a lot of newspapers back in the day. It's just he wasn't.
They weren't digitized back then.
They were not quite yet. So yeah, it was very interesting. I had a good time digging through.
Mm-hmm. And just for listeners themselves as well, how exactly do you pronounce his name? We talked about it just briefly before starting the recording, so I don't stumble too hard on my first crack at it.
So, to my understanding, and believe I'm correct about this, but if I'm not, I will take your letters. Joseph Bogdanich.
Bogdanich.
Yes.
Okay. This is not the first time we've had to really how do you pronounce this name? I know Carpelas is the one I really struggled hard with, but there's been a few, especially with Iron Range names, because they, a
lot of them
not immigrants and stuff, and so they have different names than people that we're particularly used to. A lot of Finnish,
well, and he's a Croatian immigrant, so that's one of those things. Yeah, interesting fact about him. So I mentioned going through the letters that people sent back to him. It didn't even occur to me before I went to go look at the archives that a lot of those letters could be in Croatian, but they were. And so I went.
I remember you bring that up in the Northlandia meeting. Oh yeah, they're Croatian letters.
Yeah, I was like, oh good. I can't read about half of these, but the half that I could read. And also there were a lot of letterheads in English, so you got the idea of okay, he sent a piece to somebody, and you could get kind of the gist of what was happening with some of those letters. But a lot of them, I was like, I mean, I could go through and translate this, but also, I mean, it's probably just gonna be like, thank you for the painting, we appreciate it. Mm-hmm. It's good.
And so let's now get back into his history a little bit of how he came about to be able to make the art that he made, that he sent off to people. So let's get up to the point where he starts sending his art off to people.
So he, like I mentioned, Croatian immigrant, moved to the Iron Range in the 1920s and first started working in an underground mine. Big surprise, Iron Range history.
Which one?
It mentions that it was up by Tower, but I don't know if that means that he was in the Tower Sudan mine, but he does mentions an underground mine and up by Tower, Ely area.
So we're not saying definitively that's the one, but
No.
it seems like it could be.
Anyways. A very good chance.
Continue.
Anyway, and he did not like it. He absolutely hated it. He was like, "This is not the thing. I hate this. I'm stuck in the ground." I don't think I got to use the quote in the story, but I read a quote from him calling them stinking holes in the ground. So
I can
not a fan.
I can understand now because a couple months ago, Jay Gabler and myself and Clint Austin got to go tour the Sudan mine, and there was a part in the tour where the tour guide we were in the underground area there, and he had them turn all the lights off, and he just pulled out a single little like candle wax thing that you would put on their helmets. That was like the only source of light, which he's like, you could see his face. That was basically all you could see. So, and it's cool, but it was cool for like a visit. I can understand maybe like not loving the experience of being underground so much. And
the work atmosphere leaves something to be desired, to say the least. So he but he needed to have some sort of job because, rent, everything, And so he got somebody literally put a paintbrush and a bucket in his hand and was like, well, go paint my barn then if you're going to, earn your keep around here. And so he's like, oh, okay. And he started a painting business. He started painting buildings around Ely. He was first in the Ely area and then later moved down to Eveleth and decided he liked Eveleth better. So he stayed there. No, nothing against Ely. Just telling you what happened. Anyway.
Introducing some Iron Range rivalries in here.
Let's be real. That exists way before me.
It exists here locally, too.
Anyway, so he started painting, and that led to him buying his first, like, oil painting set and being like, oh, I should start doing some actual, like, other painting. And he got onto different scenes. He wanted to do some woodland scenes. He liked doing some nature scenes. And then he got obsessed with doing paintings of the Minnesota state flower, the lady slipper. He got he took that motif and he ran with it. Like most people, what they got from him was a painting or a drawing or a carving of the Minnesota lady slipper. Like that was the pink lady slipper, the Minnesota state flower. And so that was his thing. That was his obsession. That was his like Picasso blue period, except for it was the moccasin flower. He was just like, yes, this is my thing. And so he really got onto that. He eventually moved into doing some like wood burning and wood carvings because somebody bought him a wood burning kit and he was like, yes, this is great. I love this. This is a good thing. He was definitely an artist like as a hobby. He wasn't his full-time gig. He wasn't really getting a lot of money for it, but he just did it for doing it and sent his artwork to everyone. And I mean everyone, including, as we mentioned in your little intro there, Eleanor Roosevelt, who he got a letter back from her secretary saying, thank you, Miss Roosevelt, thanks you very much for your kind gift. He got letters back from past governors who he sent paintings to different Croatian clubs throughout the country. There are different like national and local clubs that he was just like, here, take a painting. Or also musical groups who had come through Eveleth. Anyone who toured through Eveleth, it was a musical group that he really liked, especially as they played Tamburitsan music, which is the Croatian national type of style of music. He sent them lots of paintings being like, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming. So he built a lot of like relationships through people through letters and sending them pieces of mail. And he got a lot of questions back of like, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and like your paintings and who are you? Not so much like who are you? Because they met, but they were always asking for him for more information about like what is his deal. And locally, a lot of different storefronts had his paintings up in them, and he created a lot of different things for places like public libraries, historical societies, anything that kind of would be willing to take a painting from him. He sent it out to them, so you can find them anywhere from. I literally did a Google search for trying to find out where his paintings were, and I found not one of his paintings, one of his like wood rock carving pieces that he did, because he also got into some rocks and rock carving.
Sure, of course, right.
Natural progression.
Yep.
And I found one at the Hibbing Public Library. I literally called the librarian up and was like, hey, I got a weird question for you, but I see you have a piece by Joseph Bogdanich in your collection. you mind taking a picture and sending that to me? And she was like, oh, I love weird questions. This is great. I will definitely do that. She did exactly that for me. And I was like, that's very nice.
Slowly befriending yourself to every museum and library in our
I
region.
didn't send it to every single one, but I have also
Well,
done
not just for the story, for previous stories too.
Historical Society ones. Yeah. Definitely. If you have a question, I also called the Eveleth Public Library to be like, hey, who else should I be talking to about this guy? Because I'm kind of running low on people. And Mary Ellen also gave me a lot of people to talk to. Librarians, awesome resources, almost all. I mean, archivists as well, going through the archive and being able to leaf through all these letters that were saved from like the 30s all the way to the 70s. Kind of amazing, kind of a miracle to be able to do.
The unsung heroes of
Yeah.
keeping history, and also customer service. They sound very friendly, based off your tellings at least.
Very much so. Very, very receptive to being like, hey, question. I also want to throw out a mention to Tucker Nelson, because he also gave me some good resources of like, hey, here are some people, here's who to talk to. He's kind of my local, like anything Eveleth history. I'm like, hey, Tucker, you know things. Who do I talk to about this? Because I kind of know Eveleth Heritage Society, but other than that, so he gave me some ideas.
Gotcha.
Speaking of the rock carving, there's also, I took a visit. I was up on the Iron Range visiting family or whatever, and I took a visit and saw one of his large rock carving memorials. There were a bunch of these in Eveleth, but unfortunately, progression, things like the highway moving slightly and other projects like that, a lot of them ended up getting torn down. But one of them still existed at the Eveleth Veterans Campground entranceway. And there's a little Y as you go in, and right there's like this big rock sculpture thing. And you don't even, I don't want to say you don't necessarily think about it as you drive past it, but it's been there for years and years, and I've been there many times and not really been like, oh, who created this? But it's signed Joseph Bogdanich, 1952.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And, he's like, sends all this artwork off to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I feel like should be acknowledged that that's not as easy to have done back then as it is now. To get those addresses, sounds like it'd be a lot of extra work, considering things I can't exactly Google. Like, even today with Google, it's still a little tricky sometimes. But like, you could do it, but like without that information, that's a lot of extra work on top of the fact that you're just giving away art that you've made yourself. Like, I can't speak to how much time was put into each individual piece to put out, but I imagine it was enough time that's like, well, that's an investment you put in time-wise for that.
Well, and I have to say, I kind of understand his urge to do that, to like create something and then give it away to somebody, because that is something that I do myself with things like cross-stitch and knitting or crocheting pieces. I'm just, people are like, hey, either they ask me, can you make this for me? And I go, yeah, absolutely. That's a way I've shown appreciation to people. I literally had a dance instructor who we worked on a piece together, and I was like, I'm just going to make her this piece because she keeps saying this phrase over and over and over. By the way, it was booty, 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 rocket everywhere. And so I made her a piece, and it's up in the dance studio right now. It's a cross-stitch piece. So I really get the urge behind him to be like, hey, I want to show my appreciation. Art is my way to do that. I'm going to do that. But also, yeah, incredible to send it to all these different places. And how bold you have to be to either ask for people for their addresses so you can send them things, or find another way to connect and find their addresses. That's pretty incredible.
And Teri, what can we take away from learning about this artist who died over 50 years ago? This isn't, a recent person of interest from the Iron Range. Like, we're going back a ways here.
I would say that is one of my biggest takeaways. Is just his tenacity and the fact that there were people who criticized him. There are people who thought his art was very amateurish. They didn't really like his style. And he still kept going, and he created so much work that so much of it still exists, even though, again, he died over 50 years ago. There's huge collections of it in like the Eveleth City Hall. People have their own individual collections of it. The fact that he created all these pieces that have outlasted his actual time on Earth, I think that's something to really kind of consider.
I feel like that's most of the known artists that I'm aware of, is that they're not really appreciated in their time.
Yeah.
That's just kind of like the famous shtick of being an artist, is that you're not appreciated in your time.
Very much so. Yeah, I feel like he definitely fits the mold in that. Breaks it in other ways because he's very into being his own person and going his own way, which is really cool.
And then going off that, how do you think that he represents Northlandia? Like, he serves as that representative of Northlandia, of maybe Northlandia past, He
was just such a character. He's such a unique creation. Like, he wouldn't exist without there being mining on the Iron Range, that drew him to the area initially, but then also finding that he didn't like it and finding that he needed to do something else to get out of there and find his new calling. That definitely fits the area perfectly. I feel like he's a product of the place that he is, but the place that he lived was also changed by him being there. Mm-hmm. Sometimes literally with the case of the Misabi piece at the Eveleth Veterans Park.
Gotcha. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there, Teri. Thanks again so much for joining us. Curious to see who the next person of interest is we inevitably find on the Iron Range.
It's bound to happen. Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber at Duluth News Tribune at duluthnewstribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss. You're now in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.